The council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, hanging in the void between stars. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated areas, their forms ranging from the gaseous Valkyrie to the crystalline ZH. Today, the chamber hummed with an energy that felt like dread. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood at the human platform, her uniform crisp despite the 14-hour journey through jump space. She was 53 years old, with grey streaking through her black hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. Around her, the holographic displays showed the same terrifying image, a red mass spreading across the star maps like a disease. The Krithak swarm. Council speaker Jotik, a being that looked like a floating arrangement of geometric shapes, addressed the chamber. His translated voice carried weight. The projections are complete. The swarm will reach human space in 43 standard days. We have analyzed every possible defense strategy. The conclusion is unanimous. Elena already knew what was coming. She had read the reports during her journey. Every military mind in the galaxy had looked at the numbers and reached the same answer. Humanity must evacuate. Jotik continued. Your species has fought bravely in your short time among the stars, but the swarm has consumed 17 civilizations. Species with technology thousands of years beyond yours. Species with psionic powers that could crack planets. All fell within months. A Valkyrie representative, her gaseous form swirling with colors that Elena's translator identified as sympathy, spoke next. We offer you sanctuary, humans. Your culture will be preserved. Your people will survive, even if your worlds do not. This is not defeat. This is survival. Elena looked at the displayed statistics. Human space consisted of 23 colonized systems, population 12 billion, fleet strength 3,200 warships, time since first contact with alien life 312 years. By galactic standards, humanity was still an infant. The swarm's numbers made her stomach tight. 70,000 bioships confirmed, with possibly twice that number in reserve. Each ship was a living creature, grown rather than built, capable of healing from damage and adapting to weapons. The swarm consumed everything: planets, stations, ships, people, and converted it all into more swarm. AZH-Atun military advisor projected tactical simulations. In each one, human defenses collapsed within weeks. The crystalline being's voice was kind, almost gentle. Your kinetic weapons are impressive, Admiral. Your tactical creativity is noteworthy, but you lack the numbers, the technology, and the time. The mathematical probability of human victory is 0.3%. The probability of extinction is 99.7%. The chamber fell silent. Species that had lived for millennia, that had fought wars across galaxies, all looked at Elena with genuine sadness. They had come to like humanity. Humans were loud, stubborn, and constantly asking questions that challenged ancient assumptions. The galaxy would be quieter without them. Elena took a slow breath. She thought about Earth, with its blue oceans and green countenance. She thought about the colonies, where children were being born who had never seen humanity's homeworld. She thought about her own daughter, a shuttle pilot stationed at Proxima Centauri. Thank you for the offer, Elena said quietly, and thank you for your honest assessment. We understand the odds. We've reviewed the same data, run the same simulations. The council members shifted. Some showed relief. The decision would be easier if humanity accepted the inevitable. However, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. Humanity must respectfully decline your offer of evacuation. The chamber erupted, not with anger, but with shock and confusion. Jotik's geometric form pulsed with colors Elena's translator couldn't interpret. Admiral Buscus, the council speaker, said carefully, perhaps you misunderstood. We are offering to save your species, to preserve your culture. If you remain, there will be nothing left to save. We understood perfectly, Elena replied. We're evacuating civilians from the outer colonies. The young, the old, those who cannot fight. We're sending them deeper into our territory, behind our defensive lines, but our fleet will remain. We will face the swarm. A younger representative, from a species humanity had only met twice, spoke with genuine distress. This is suicide. We've explained the projections. You cannot win. Elena looked directly at the young alien. You're right. According to every simulation, every analysis, every tactical model, we cannot win. The math doesn't support victory. She paused, letting her words settle. But humans have never been very good at accepting what the math says we can't do. The Valkyrie representative's colors shifted to something Elena's translator marked as confusion. You would choose extinction over survival. This makes no logical sense. It makes perfect sense to us, Elena said. Those are our worlds, our homes. Our children live there. If we run, where does it end? How far do we flee before we're finally cornered? And what kind of species would we be if we abandoned everything at the first real test? Jotika's form dimmed slightly. Admiral, your courage is admirable, but courage alone will not stop the swarm. They have destroyed species far more powerful than yours. Elena smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several council members unconsciously move backward. Council Speaker, there's something you should understand about humanity. We've only been in space for 3 centuries. Do you know what we were doing for the 10,000 years before that? She didn't wait for an answer. We were fighting each other, constantly, brutally. We developed weapons that could end all life on our planet. We nearly used them, several times. We learned to fight in every environment our world offered, in oceans, in deserts, in frozen wastelands, in our own cities. We learned that victory isn't about having better odds, it's about refusing to stop. The Admiral straightened her uniform. You've told us we can't win. You're probably right. But the swarm is about to learn something that our own ancestors learned the hard way. Humans don't need to win. We just need to make sure the other side loses worse. Elena turned to leave the platform, then stopped. We'll send you our tactical data as the battle progresses. Maybe you'll learn something, or maybe you'll just have detailed documentation of humanity's final act. Either way, when the swarm comes, we'll be ready. As she walked away, the council chamber remained silent. 47 species, some older than human civilization itself, struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. The Jatoon military advisor finally spoke into the quiet. They're actually going to fight. They know they'll die, and they're going to fight anyway. The Valkyrie's colors shifted to something new, something the translator couldn't quite name. It was somewhere between respect and fear. The shipyard orbiting Mars hummed with activity that hadn't stopped in 3 years. Chief Engineer Sarah Chen walked through the manufacturing bay, her boots clanging on metal walkways as assembly drones worked on weapons that most of the galaxy had forgotten existed. She stopped at observation window 7, watching as a railgun barrel was being installed into the spine of a dreadnought. The barrel stretched for 3 kilometers, a magnetic acceleration tunnel capable of launching projectiles at 90% light speed. Around her, younger engineers checked readouts and adjusted systems. "Ma'am," one of them called out, a kid fresh from academy named Torres. "The Valkyrie technical advisor is asking questions again. He wants to know why we're still using physical projectiles instead of energy weapons." Sarah smiled. She had heard this question 100 times from a dozen species. "Tell him the same thing I told the others. Energy dissipates, matter doesn't." The Valkyrie had shared their plasma cannon technology freely, genuinely trying to help humanity prepare. Most human ships carried a few energy weapons now, but they were secondary systems. The primary weapons remained stubbornly physical: railguns, missiles, and kinetic kill vehicles. What the aliens didn't understand was that humanity had tested their weapons against alien shield technology. Every species in the council used energy shields because every species fought with energy weapons. It was efficient, it was clean, and it had worked for thousands of years. But those shields were designed to disperse heat and redirect particle beams. They weren't designed to stop a 20-ton tungsten rod moving at relativistic speeds. Sarah's communicator buzzed. Her supervisor's face appeared, looking exhausted. "Chen, we need you in the drone bay. The latest AI coordination test had some issues." She made her way through the shipyard, passing construction crews working triple shifts. Everyone knew what was coming. The swarm had entered the outer rim of explored space 2 days ago. 43 days had become 30-5. The drone bay was organized chaos. Thousands of small autonomous craft sat in launch cradles, each one loaded with sensors and weapons. Captain James Rodriguez stood in the center, arguing with a holographic display. "The problem," he explained as Sarah approached, "is that the Jatoon keep insisting our drone AI is too aggressive. They say it'll make wasteful decisions." Sarah looked at the tactical display. Human doctrine called for drone swarms that could make independent decisions in millisecond timeframes. Each drone was expendable, designed to sacrifice itself if it meant taking out a swarm ship. The AI coordinating them was programmed with one priority: maximize enemy casualties, minimize friendly casualties, accept any exchange rate better than 1-to-1. "What do the J-Toon use?" she asked. "Careful coordination, tactical retreats to preserve forces, measured responses." Rodriguez shook his head. "They've never fought something like the swarm with our approach. They try to minimize losses. We're trying to maximize damage." It was another difference the aliens struggled to understand. Most galactic species had small populations spread across many worlds. They fought carefully, preserving every ship and soldier. Humanity had 12 billion people and a military tradition that sometimes celebrated suicidal bravery. Human tactical doctrine assumed heavy casualties and planned accordingly. Across human space, similar preparations continued. At Proxima Centauri, Admiral Chen Park watched as the defense fleet practiced formations that looked wrong to every alien tactical observer. Human ships flew closer together than anyone thought, safe, overlapping their point defense networks. They practiced ramming maneuvers. They trained for the possibility that every ship might be boarded. On the colony world of New Shanghai, Marine Lieutenant Maria Santos walked through training facilities where soldiers practiced close-quarters combat. The aliens had shared their advanced powered armor and energy weapons. The Marines used them, but they also trained with chemical propellant firearms, combat knives, and explosive charges. "Lieutenant," one of her sergeants asked, "why are we training for boarding actions? Galactic military doctrine says boarding enemy vessels is obsolete. Too dangerous." Maria checked her rifle, a weapon that would have been familiar to soldiers from 300 years ago, just more advanced. "Because the swarm uses bioships, Sergeant, living organisms, and living things can be infected, poisoned, and destroyed from the inside. If we can board them, we can kill them better." The sergeant nodded slowly, understanding. Galactic warfare was clean, fought at long range with precise weapons. Human warfare was personal, brutal, and close. Humans had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing at arm's length. In orbit around Earth, the flagship Indomitable ran through final checks. Admiral Vasquez walked its corridors, inspecting systems that combined alien technology with human engineering. The ship's shields were Valkyrie design, its engines were J-Toon quantum drives, but its weapons were pure human invention. She stopped at the ship's chapel, a small room that served all faiths and none. Inside, crew members from a dozen religious traditions sat quietly. Some prayed, some meditated, some just sat in silence, thinking about what was coming. Vasquez didn't enter. She understood what they needed. In 3 days, the fleet would move to Proxima Centauri to establish the defensive line. In 32 days, the swarm would arrive. Between now and then, these men and women needed to make peace with what they were about to do. Her communicator chimed. It was her daughter, Lieutenant Amy Vasquez, calling from her shuttle squadron. "Mom." Amy's voice was steady. "We just finished the last drill. The squadron's ready." Elena closed her eyes briefly. She had tried to get Amy transferred to a safer position, but her daughter had refused. "Good. Get some rest while you can." "Mom, do you really think we can win?" It was the question everyone was asking. Elena thought about all the preparations, all the weapons, all the tactics that the galaxy thought were obsolete or insane. She thought about the math that said humanity had a 0.3% chance of victory. "Honestly, I don't know," Elena admitted. "The odds are terrible, but I know one thing. The swarm thinks we're prey. They're about to learn we're predators." Across human space, the final preparations continued. In shipyards and training facilities, on colony worlds and orbital stations, humanity prepared for war. They studied the swarm's tactics from the battles that destroyed 17 civilizations. They looked at what everyone else had tried and failed to do. Then they prepared to do something different. The Galactic Council's observers stationed throughout human space sent back reports filled with concern and confusion. The humans were building weapons that seemed primitive. They were training for scenarios that military doctrine said were impossible. They were preparing to fight at close range, to board enemy vessels, to turn every meter of space into a battlefield. One observer, a Valkyrie military analyst, sent a message to her superiors. "I don't understand human tactics, but I'm beginning to realize something. We've been fighting the swarm wrong. We've been trying to minimize our losses. The humans are preparing to maximize the swarm's losses, regardless of cost." I think they might actually hurt the swarm before they die. I just hope the galaxy learns something from their sacrifice. What the observer didn't understand, what none of the aliens could truly grasp, was that humanity wasn't preparing for a heroic last stand. They were preparing to win. The fact that victory seemed mathematically impossible just meant humans would have to change the mathematics. In 32 days, the swarm would arrive at Proxima Centauri expecting prey. Instead, they would find something the galaxy hadn't seen in a long time, a species that refused to accept defeat, armed with weapons designed to kill at any cost, willing to pay any price for victory. The countdown continued. The swarm arrived at Proxima Centauri exactly on schedule. Because the swarm was always punctual, 70,000 bioships emerged from jump space in a formation that had conquered 17 civilizations. Each vessel was a living nightmare, organic holes covered in armor that could regenerate, weapons that were grown rather than built. Admiral Elena Vasquez watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as sensors painted the enemy fleet across holographic displays. The numbers were worse than the projections, closer to 80,000 ships, not 70. And each one was massive, some larger than human dreadnoughts. "All ships report ready," her tactical officer announced. Commander Sarah Mitchell had served with Elena for 15 years. Her voice was calm, but her hands were tight on her console. 3,200 human warships hung in formation across the Proxima system. Behind them, on the colony worlds, 10 million civilians had refused evacuation. They were hiding in bunkers deep underground, waiting to see if they would have a future. The Galactic Council had observers positioned at a safe distance, 17 light hours away. They were recording everything, documenting what they believed would be humanity's final battle. Several species had sent messages of respect and sorrow. The Valkyrie had offered prayers in humanity's honor. The Jatoon had already begun composing the historical record of human civilization. "Enemy fleet is advancing," Mitchell reported. "They're moving in standard swarm formation, three-dimensional envelope pattern." Elena studied the display. The swarm always used the same strategy because it always worked. They would surround the defenders, attack from every direction simultaneously, and overwhelm through sheer numbers. Shields would fail under sustained fire. Ships would die. Worlds would be consumed. Except today, the swarm was about to learn that humans didn't follow the standard script. "Execute Kasparov Protocol," Elena ordered. Across the human fleet, 2,000 ships suddenly accelerated outward, away from Proxima Centauri. Their sensor signatures blazed bright, appearing to be the entire human fleet retreating in panic. The remaining 1,200 ships went dark, activating stealth systems that the Jatoon had sworn wouldn't work against swarm. Bio-sensors. The swarm reacted exactly as human tactical computers had predicted. The enemy fleet split into 3 groups, moving to envelope and destroy what they thought was humanity's entire military force. 70,000 ships divided into groups of 25,000, 20,000, and 35,000, spreading across millions of kilometers. "They've committed to the pursuit," Mitchell said, her voice tight with tension. "All 3 groups are following the decoys." Elena counted seconds. The swarm groups were spreading further apart, each one convinced they were chasing a portion of the human fleet. The decoy ships, mostly automated drones with enhanced sensor signatures, led the swarm exactly where humanity wanted them. "Range to optimal firing position," Elena asked. 40 seconds. The stealth fleet drifted in the darkness between the swarm groups. 1,200 warships, weapons charged, holding absolutely still. Human crews barely breathed, knowing that any energy emission could give them away. 30 seconds. On the Indomitable's bridge, every officer watched their displays. This was the moment. If the swarm detected them, if human stealth technology failed, if the tactical computers had miscalculated by even a small margin, the fleet would be destroyed in minutes. 20 seconds. Elena thought about her daughter, flying a shuttle somewhere in this formation. She thought about Earth, about the billions of people watching on delayed broadcast, knowing their fate was being decided right now. 10 seconds. Swarm groups are at maximum separation. 5 seconds. They're moving into the kill zone. Mark. All ships, weapons free. Fire everything. The darkness lit up with violence. 1,200 human warships opened fire simultaneously. Railguns that had been charging for hours released their fury, launching tungsten rods at 90% light speed. The projectiles crossed millions of kilometers in seconds, striking swarm bioships that had no shields raised, no defensive posture, completely focused on pursuing what they thought was a fleeing enemy. The first volley killed 6,000 swarm ships in under a minute, each railgun slug hit with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The swarm's regenerating armor could handle energy weapons, could heal from plasma burns and particle beam damage. It couldn't regenerate from kinetic impacts that vaporized entire sections of hull. The projectiles passed completely through their targets, often striking 2 or 3 ships before finally losing momentum. Second volley, fire. Alina commanded. Nuclear-pumped missiles launched from every human ship. Not the clean antimatter weapons the aliens used, but dirty fission devices surrounded by tungsten shrapnel. Each warhead was designed to detonate at a precise point calculated by turning each explosion into a shotgun blast of relativistic fragments. Another 4,000. Swarm ships died. The swarm's reaction was instant. The bioships began to turn, to regroup, to respond to this ambush. But they were separated into 3 groups across millions of kilometers. Human tactical doctrine called this a defeat in detail. Destroy an enemy, piece by piece, before they could combine their strength. Drone swarms. Launch. Mitchell ordered. 50,000 autonomous drones erupted from launch bays. Each one was small, barely larger than a fighter craft, loaded with sensors and a single high-yield warhead. The AI controlling them had one mission: get close to swarm ships and detonate. Human doctrine accepted a 10-to-1 loss ratio on drones. The AI was programmed to achieve better than that or die trying. The drones swarmed like angry insects, moving in patterns too complex for organic minds to coordinate. They dodged return fire, accepted losses, and pressed forward. When they reached swarm vessels, they detonated in clusters, focusing their explosions to punch through armor. The Galactic Council observers, 17 light-hours away, recorded everything in stunned silence. One of the Valkyrie analysts spoke into the recording. "This isn't warfare as we know it. This is systematic slaughter." But the swarm was adapting. They always adapted. The bioships began using mass point defense, filling space with bioprojectiles that destroyed incoming drones and missiles. They started moving in tighter formations, presenting fewer vulnerable angles, and they were still coming. Despite losing 10,000 ships, the swarm had 70,000 left. They were beginning to coordinate, to bring their numerical advantage to bear. "Third swarm group is attempting to flank us," Mitchell reported. 20 minutes until they're in firing range. Alina nodded. The initial ambush had worked better than projected. But now came the hard part. All ships, execute dispersal pattern Delta, break into squadron elements. The human fleet fragmented. Instead of maintaining formation, they broke into groups of 20 ships each, scattering across the battle space. It looked like panic to the swarm. It looked like suicide to the watching. Aliens, it was neither. Each squadron operated independently, moving in 3-dimensional patterns that forced the swarm to split their attention. Human ships flew closer together than any galactic force would dare, overlapping their point defense networks. When swarm vessels closed to weapons range, they found themselves facing concentrated fire from multiple directions. The battle became brutal. Human ships started dying. The Valiant took a direct hit from swarm bioweapons. Its hull breached, crew lost. The Perseverance sacrificed itself to cover the retreat of damaged vessels, ramming a swarm cruiser at full speed. The Defiant lost power and drifted helpless until 3 swarm ships tore it apart. But for every human ship destroyed, the swarm lost 5, then 6, then 7. "Fourth hour of engagement," Mitchell announced. Her voice was hoarse. "Enemy casualties estimated at 23,000. Our losses at 412 ships." Alina looked at the displays. The mathematics were changing. The swarm had expected to lose perhaps a few hundred ships while destroying humanity entirely. Instead, they were bleeding at an unsustainable rate. More importantly, they were confused. The swarm operated on pattern recognition, on instincts developed over countless battles. Their patterns said prey should flee or die quickly. Prey didn't ambush. Prey didn't trade losses at 7-to-1 ratios. Prey didn't keep attacking even when taking heavy casualties. "All squadrons, press the attack," Alina ordered. "Don't give them time to adapt." Human ships pushed forward, accepting damage to deliver killing blows. Captains made decisions that no galactic commander would approve, spending their ships' lives like currency to purchase swarm deaths. It was wasteful. It was aggressive. It was working. The swarm began something the observers had never seen before. They started to retreat. Not all of them, not in an organized way, but individual bioships were pulling back, withdrawing from engagements they would normally fight to the death. "They're hesitating," Mitchell said, disbelief in her voice. "The swarm is actually hesitating." Alina allowed herself the smallest smile. "They've never fought anyone who hurts them worse than they hurt us. They don't have a pattern for this. Keep hitting them." The battle raged on. The war expanded like a wound across human space. What started at Proxima Centauri became battles at 5 Colony systems as the swarm attempted to flank human defenses and attack from multiple directions. Humanity met them at every point, and the killing continued. Captain James Wu stood in the docking bay of the Indomitable, watching his Marines prepare for an operation that would have horrified any galactic military advisor. They were going to board a swarm Bio-Titan, one of the massive command vessels that coordinated entire fleets. "Equipment check," he called out, his voice echoing in the bay. 50 Marines responded instantly, veterans all, each one knowing this mission had maybe a 30% survival rate. Human command had decided that acceptable. The boarding craft were ugly, functional things, armored shuttles with drill-tipped rams designed to punch through organic hulls. Inside each one sat a squad of Marines carrying weapons that mixed alien technology with human brutality. Plasma cutters to burn through swarm tissue, chemical weapons to poison biosystems, and old-fashioned explosives to destroy structural organs. "Sir," Sergeant Maria Chen approached, her powered armor making her look like a mechanical giant. "Third squad is ready. We've got the thermal charges." Wu nodded. The thermal charges were possibly the most horrific weapon humanity had deployed. They were designed to ignite the oxygen-rich atmosphere inside swarm bioships, creating firestorms that would burn through organic corridors like wildfire. The swarm's own infrastructure would become fuel for their destruction. "Listen up," Wu addressed his Marines. "Once we're inside, we have 20 minutes before that thing's immune system adapts to our presence. 20 minutes to reach the neural cluster, plant the charges, and get out. Anyone who falls behind, stays behind. We don't have time for heroic rescues." The Marines nodded. They had trained for this, studied the internal biology of swarm vessels from the remains of destroyed ships. They knew where to cut, where to burn, where to place explosives for maximum damage. "Load up," Wu ordered. The boarding craft launched, accelerating toward the point. Defense fire from human ships cleared a path, but swarm bioprojectiles still found targets. 2 boarding craft were destroyed in the approach. 100 Marines died before they even reached the target. Wu's craft slammed into the Bio-Titan's hull at full speed, the drill tip bit into organic armor, spinning through layers of regenerating tissue until it punched through into an internal cavity. The craft's hatches blew open and Marines poured out into an environment that smelled like rotten meat and looked like the inside of a nightmare. The corridors were wet, pulsing with fluids that might have been blood or something worse. Organs that served as structural supports flexed around them. The temperature was body warm and rising as the bioship's immune system recognized the intrusion. "Move, move," Wu shouted, leading his squad deeper into the vessel. They followed the maps created from previous boarding actions, heading toward what human xenobiologists believed was the neural cluster. The swarm's internal defenses activated. Warrior organisms, things that were part of the ship itself, emerged from the walls. They looked like a mix between crabs and spiders, each one armed with bioweapons that sprayed acid or fired bone shards. Marines opened fire. Plasma cutters burned through chitin armor. Chemical rounds sprayed toxins that made the organisms seize and die. But the defenders kept coming, and Marines started falling. Wu saw Corporal Davidson go down under 3 warrior organisms, his armor breached, his screams cut short. "Keep moving," Wu ordered, hating himself for leaving the wounded behind. "Second squad, seal that corridor." The Marines behind them placed explosive charges, collapsing passages to slow pursuit. The thermal charges on their backs felt heavier with each step, knowing what would happen when they were activated. They reached the neural cluster after 15 minutes of fighting through organic hell. It was a chamber filled with pulsing tissue, neural fibers connecting to every part of the massive ship. This was the brain, the coordination center that controlled this particular piece of the swarm. "Plant the charges," Wu commanded. "Chen, start the timer." Marines placed thermal charges around the chamber, setting them to ignite in 5 minutes. The charges would superheat the atmosphere, using the bioship's own oxygen as fuel. The fire would spread through the ventilation organs, burning the biotitan from the inside out. Charges set, Chen reported. 4 minutes to ignition. They ran. The bioship seemed to know it was dying because the warrior organisms were everywhere now, swarming from every corridor. Marines fired as they retreated, spending ammunition and lives to buy seconds. Wu's squad lost 7 more people in the fighting withdrawal. They reached the boarding craft with 90 seconds to spare. The pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Wang, had kept the engines hot despite taking fire from swarm defenders. Everyone in she screamed out 27 Marines had started this mission. 16 made it back to the craft. Wang punched the throttle, pulling away from the biotitan as the timer counted down. The thermal charges detonated. Through the viewport, Wu watched as fire erupted from multiple points on the biotitan's hull. The flames spread impossibly fast, following oxygen pathways through the organic structure. Within 2 minutes, the massive vessel was an inferno. Within 5, it was a dead hulk tumbling through space. 1 down, Wu said quietly. How many more? Across the battlespace, similar operations were underway. Humanity had discovered that boarding was effective against bioships because living organisms could be killed from inside. It was dangerous, it cost lives, but it worked. And that was all that mattered. On the colony world of New Johannesburg, civilians watched as the swarm broke through the orbital defenses. Colonial defense forces, a mix of militia and retired military, prepared for ground combat. They had orders from Earth, orders that civilian government officials had protested but military command had insisted upon. Governor Sarah Martinez stood in the command center, looking at evacuation statistics. 70 million people on this world. Time until swarm landing, 2 hours. Percentage evacuated, 40%. Governor, her military advisor said quietly, we need to implement Thermopylae Protocol. Martinez closed her eyes. Thermopylae Protocol meant that those who couldn't evacuate in time would stay behind to fight, to slow the swarm, to buy time for others to escape. It meant 60 million people were going to die fighting a delaying action. Do it, she whispered. The announcement went out. Some people panicked, some prayed, some picked up weapons and headed to defensive positions. Parents said goodbye to children being loaded onto evacuation ships. Husbands kissed wives one last time. Old veterans who had thought their fighting days were over checked their weapons and remembered old skills. When the swarm landed, they expected prey. They found defenders who fought with desperate courage, who made the swarm pay for every meter of ground, who destroyed infrastructure rather than let it be converted into swarm biomass. The swarm took New Johannesburg, but the battle cost them 3 weeks and countless bioships. 70 million humans died on that world, but their sacrifice bought time for other colonies to evacuate, for the fleet to regroup, for humanity to prepare the next defense. Admiral Vasquez watched the reports come in from across human space. New Johannesburg had fallen. Proxima 3 was under siege. The colony at Tau Ceti had implemented Scorched Earth Protocol, destroying their own orbital infrastructure to deny it to the swarm. The human casualties were approaching 200 million dead. By any reasonable measure, it was a catastrophe. But by the measure that mattered, the exchange ratio, humanity was winning. For every human killed, 3 or more swarm organisms died. Admiral, Commander Mitchell reported, her voice numb from exhaustion. We're receiving data from the Galactic Council observers. They're asking for tactical briefings. Multiple species are requesting copies of our combat doctrine. Alina looked at the displays, showing ongoing battles across 5 systems. Humanity was paying in blood for every victory, spending lives to kill the swarm. It was brutal, it was necessary, and it was working. Tell them, Alina said slowly, that our doctrine is simple. We calculated the price we were willing to pay for victory. The answer was everything. The swarm is learning that everything means exactly what it says. She thought about the Marines boarding swarm vessels, about the civilians choosing to stay and fight, about the captains who ordered their ships into suicidal ramming attacks when ammunition ran low. She thought about her daughter, still alive but flying missions that had killed half her squadron. Also tell them, Elena added, her voice hard, that we're not done yet. The swarm thought we were prey. We're going to teach them we're the hunters. The war ground on, measured in destroyed ships and burning worlds, in last stands and desperate victories. in a mounting toll of dead that would have broken any other species. But humanity had made a choice at the very beginning. They would rather die fighting than live fleeing. The swarm was learning that some prey had teeth. 6 months after the swarm first entered human space, the war ended not with humanity's extinction but with something the galaxy had never witnessed. The swarm retreated. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching long-range sensors track the surviving swarm bioships as they withdrew from the Proxima system. They weren't moving to regroup or to attack from a new angle. They were running, fleeing back toward the galactic rim, leaving human space entirely. "Confirm sensor data," she said quietly, not quite believing it. Commander Mitchell, her face gaunt from 6 months of constant warfare, checked and rechecked the displays. "Confirmed, Admiral, all swarm vessels are withdrawing on random vectors. This isn't tactical repositioning, they're scattering around the bridge." Officers sat in stunned silence. They had prepared for every outcome except victory. "Casualty reports?" Elena asked, because victory always had a price. Mitchell's voice was hollow as she read the numbers. 230 million civilians dead, 12 colony worlds rendered uninhabitable, 817 warships destroyed, military casualties at 15 million, New Johannesburg, Proxima 3, Tau Ceti, New Shanghai, and 7 other colonies lost to scorched earth protocol. The numbers were staggering. Nearly 2% of humanity's total population dead. Worlds that would take centuries to rebuild, if they could be rebuilt at all. Families destroyed. Futures erased. The price had been exactly what Elena had promised. Everything, and the swarm's losses. She asked. Mitchell allowed herself the smallest, most exhausted smile. "Conservative estimate, 40% of their total combat biomass. Over 32,000 confirmed ship kills. They're broken, Admiral. For the first time in recorded history, the swarm is broken." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 3 days later. The crystal chamber was crowded with representatives who could barely process what had happened. The species that had offered humanity sympathy and funeral rites now looked at Admiral Vasquez with something between awe and fear. Council Speaker, Jothic, geometric form pulsed with colors, Elena's translator interpreted as confusion and respect. "Admiral Vasquez, the Council has reviewed the battle records. We have analyzed the tactics, studied the casualty reports, and consulted with our military experts. We still do not understand how you won." Elena stood at the human platform, her uniform bearing new decorations for a war that had aged her 10 years in 6 months. "We didn't win through superior technology or numbers," she said. "We won because we were willing to pay a price the swarm wasn't prepared to accept." A Velkari representative, her gaseous form swirling with uncertainty, spoke. "But the cost to your species, the deaths, the destroyed worlds, how can this be considered victory?" "Because we're still here," Elena replied simply. "We lost billions of credits and infrastructure, millions of lives, years of development, but we still exist. Our species survives. Our children will grow up in a universe where the swarm fears to attack us. That's victory." The Jetun military advisor who had presented the original projections floated forward. "Admiral, our analysis suggested you had a 0.3% chance of success. What did we miss in our calculations?" Elena thought about Marines boarding bioships, knowing they likely wouldn't return. About civilians who chose to stay and fight instead of flee. About captains who rammed their ships into swarm vessels when ammunition ran out. About her own daughter, who survived for missions that killed her entire original squadron. "You calculated based on conventional military doctrine," she said. "Preserve forces, minimize losses, fight carefully. But humanity learned warfare in a different school. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other on Earth before we reached space. We learned that sometimes the only way to win is to make the enemy pay more than they're willing to lose." She pulled up tactical displays showing key battles. "At Proxima, we didn't try to minimize our casualties. We maximized theirs. When they adapted, we adapted faster. When they pressed us, we pressed back harder. We turned every battle into a test of will, and we were willing to lose more ships, more people, more resources than they could afford to kill." A younger species representative, one whose civilization had fled from the swarm decades ago, spoke with genuine distress. "But the cost to your people, how do they accept this? How do they not hate their leaders for spending so many lives?" Elena looked at the alien, understanding the question came from a fundamentally different cultural perspective. "Because they chose it. We told our people the odds. We told them the cost, and they chose to fight anyway. From the Marines who boarded swarm vessels to the civilians who stayed behind to buy time for evacuations, they all chose to pay the price. The Valkyrie representative swirled with colors. The translator marked as deep sadness. Your species will take generations to recover from this. Yes, Elena agreed, but we'll recover. The alternative was extinction. Some prices are worth paying. The council chamber fell silent. Finally, Jothic spoke. The Galactic Council formally requests military alliance with humanity. Multiple species wish to establish defense treaties. Your tactical doctrines will be studied at every military academy in the galaxy. The speaker paused. The swarm has also updated their hive behavior protocols. They have added humanity to a list we did not know existed. Species to avoid. Elena nodded slowly. We'll discuss treaty terms. But understand, this humanity didn't fight the way we did because we wanted to. We fought that way because we had no choice. We hope to never fight that way again. The cost is too high, even in victory. 3 months later, reconstruction efforts were underway across human space. New Johannesburg and the other lost worlds were being surveyed for potential The military was rebuilding, incorporating lessons learned from the war, and humanity was helping other species develop defense strategies against the swarm. Captain James Wu, promoted after surviving 8 boarding missions, worked with G-Toon military cadets, teaching them tactics that made the crystal beings visibly uncomfortable. The key, he explained, is accepting that casualties are inevitable. Plan for them, train for them, make them count. A young G-Toon officer asked, but how do soldiers accept missions with low survival rates? Our forces would refuse such orders. Wu thought about the Marines he had lost. Friends who had died in organic corridors on swarm vessels. You give them a choice. You tell them the truth about the odds, and you lead from the front. I didn't ask my Marines to do anything I wasn't willing to do myself. At the military cemetery on Earth, Elena Vasquez walked among rows of markers representing the 15 million military dead. Her daughter Amy walked beside her, recovered from injuries sustained when her shuttle was hit in the final week of the war. Was it worth it? Amy asked quietly. Helena looked at the endless rows of graves. That's the wrong question. It wasn't about worth. It was about survival. We had no good choices, only necessary ones. The galaxy thinks we're crazy, Amy said. I heard a Valkyrie advisor call human tactics clinically insane. Helena smiled without humor. Maybe they're right. Maybe you have to be a little crazy to fight the way we did. But crazy worked. The swarm is gone. Humanity survives. In the Galactic Council archives, military historians were compiling the official record of the Swarm War. The G-Toon military analyst, who had predicted humanity's extinction, wrote the introduction. For 17 civilizations, the Krithak swarm represented inevitable extinction. Species more advanced, more numerous, and more powerful than humanity fell before the swarm in weeks or months. Human civilization, by all calculations, should have been the 18th victim. Instead, humanity broke the swarm. Not through superior technology or miraculous weapons, but through a fundamental difference in how they approach existential threats. Where other species calculate the probability of victory, humans calculate the cost they're willing to pay. Where others minimize losses, humans maximize enemy casualties. Where others retreat to preserve forces, humans advance to inflict damage. The human approach violates every principle of conventional military doctrine. It is wasteful, brutal, and accepts catastrophic losses. It should not work. Yet it did. The cost was devastating. Humanity lost population percentages that would break most civilizations, but they survived, and in surviving, they taught the galaxy a lesson. Some species cannot be conquered because they refuse to accept defeat, regardless of cost. Military academies will study human tactics for centuries. The debate will continue about whether their methods are brilliant or mad. But one fact is undeniable. When the galaxy gave humanity a 0.3% chance of survival, they took those odds and won anyway. The swarm learned what 17 civilizations could not teach them. Some prey are actually predators, and some predators will burn down their own house to kill the invader inside. Humanity is both hope and warning to the galaxy. Hope, because they proved the swarm can be beaten. Warning, because any species that fights humans should understand, they will not stop. They will not yield, and they will pay any price to win. At the memorial wall on Earth, A Valkyrie child visiting with diplomatic parents looked at the endless names carved in stone. The child asked their guide, a human veteran, "Are humans the strongest species in the galaxy?" The veteran looked at the memorial, thinking about friends whose names were carved there. "No, kid, not even close. There are species out there with better technology, bigger fleets, more resources." "Then how did you win?" the child asked. The veteran smiled sadly. "Because strength isn't just about what you have. It's about what you're willing to lose. And when it came down to it, we were willing to lose everything except our future. The swarm couldn't match that price." The child looked confused, trying to understand. Their Valkyrie parent swirled with thoughtful colors and spoke gently. "Come, little one. Some lessons are too hard for now. Just remember, if you ever face impossible odds, remember that humans faced worse and won. Not because victory was easy, but because defeat was unacceptable." As they walked away, the memorial wall stood silent under Earth's sun, a monument to a terrible price paid for a necessary victory. Humanity had survived their trial by fire, forever changed but still alive. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again, and somewhere in the dark between stars, the swarm remembered a species that had taught them a lesson they had never learned before. Some prey fight back, and some fights are not worth winning. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy not through permission, but through blood, fire, and an absolute refusal to die quietly. The cost was terrible, the victory was real, and the future, purchased at such price, belonged to the survivors.